As an atheist, I believe that the steady collapse of Christianity was entirely beneficial. And I definitely still do believe that dogmatic religious belief needs to be brought through the filter of rationality and deconstruction. However, I've come to learn that there are real consequences to this loss of mythology. Cognitive scientist John Vervaeke has connected this loss to a meaning crisis that emerges as anxiety, depression, and loneliness. As the Jungian psychologist D. Stephenson Bond says, "What is myth but the meanings that structure our lives? Myth gives our growth the flavor of a plot." And so in this video today, I'm going to be arguing for why atheists still need myth as an antidote to nihilism, among other things, as you'll find out. In my last video, Why Myths Still Matter, the evolutionary role of imaginal stories, I argued that myths are not simply false stories that were like failed attempts at a primitive science. Instead, they served an evolutionary purpose because certain myths are more adaptive for a culture depending on the environment they find themselves in. For example, if you lived in ancient Greece, you needed myths about Achilles and Zeus in order to survive those violent times. As I asked in the last video, given the environment you live in, what stories are going to help you become a better person who can navigate that environment better? When we look around at most of our myths, it becomes obvious that they tear us away from reality, from living good lives, and from science's ability to understand that environment. Holy texts are full of lines that directly contradict what science has revealed, and even contain moral codes that are now considered blatantly unethical. These myths fail utterly at adapting us to our contemporary world. And this is precisely why so many of us feel anxious, feel depressed, feel nihilistic, and feel like our lives have absolutely no impact on a world that is just completely meaningless anyway. So if myth is so important, and if we are left without any legitimate myth that could give our lives meaning, to orient us through the present and into a desired future, it seems like the obvious path is to develop a personal mythology. This is the ethos that Carl Jung dedicated his life to articulate. That once a cultural myth fails, it is up to the individual to pick up the mantle of myth. And so now, how do you actually do that? The writer Brendan Graham Dempsey says that an essential component of personal mythology is the as-if mode, where you pretend as if your life has meaning, where you pretend as if things happen to you for a reason. This is what gives your life a sense of forward momentum, a sense of a plot, a sense that this is happening to you for a reason. And that reason can be almost whatever you want it to be. You can believe that everything you do is completely meaningless, and there's no difference between staring at your bedroom ceiling all day or getting up to do something meaningful, enjoyable. Now, you might interject and say, I see where you're going with this. It's more motivating to give my life a bigger reason because then I'll actually live more of my life. I've heard this before, and I can get why that's probably better for your mental health, but that doesn't change the fact that reality is meaningless. Objective, material reality doesn't care about us. We just have to come to terms with that. Okay, fine. We have to come to terms with nihilism. We have to realize that meaning and reasons may just be things human beings come up with to make ourselves feel better in order to survive. But more importantly, also to thrive. Something you can actually do that. In either case, as I'll explain in the next video, we do have to come to grips with rationality and deconstruction because of the very real dangers that come with myth. There is a filter of rationality and deconstruction, and however personal and atheistic your mythology may be, you still have to take it through the filter. However much you may pretend that things you experience have a reason to them, you still have to make sure those reasons are reasonable. Remember that a myth is meant to effectively adapt you to your environment, and so a myth is made profoundly more adaptive by rationality and by science. D. Stephenson Bond refers to this rational as-if mode as symbolic consciousness, and says that it is a balance between objectivity and subjectivity, between logic and fantasy. We live in a myth while knowing we're in a myth. However meaningless it might be to choose between staying in bed or getting the fuck up and living life, I know exactly which I'd prefer to do. However quickly my meaningless life and relationships will be forgotten after I'm dead, I know exactly how much I enjoy them while I'm actually here, living them. The as-if mode of pretending that all of this has a reason is because it gives you a reason to live this brief life you have in a way that you'll actually enjoy while you're actually here. Doesn't matter if it's not real reason or not really meaningful. What matters is if you enjoy life at the end of the day. So with that being said, the rationally filtered as-if mode is not simply about giving our lives any reason. It might be easy to assume that the goal is to live life to the fullest in terms of pleasure, but as the psychologist Viktor Frankl says, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. A life in which our present is full of pleasure and oriented toward the pursuit of more pleasure is not necessarily meaningful, but that is exactly the solution many of us have already fallen into, unfortunately. Instead, you want your personal myth to highlight the most important elements of your past in order to orient yourself in a present you can actually navigate so that you can envision and move toward a future you actually want to create. You want to have a life narrative that is true to the facts, that is rational and understood with healthy critical thinking, but one that actually helps you create the life you want to live and to have an impact on the world that you consider meaningful. The point is, if you can connect your life narrative to reasons that motivate you toward a purpose that in turn helps you bring your vision to life, then you've successfully used rational as-if thinking. I'll give you a little bit of an example in this video today, but I'm also going to go into a much deeper example in the video after the next one, where I'll be giving an in-depth definition of meta-masculine. I'll actually explain why I've given my channel the name that I've given it. However, at this point, you may be wondering, why call this a personal mythology? So far, this just seems like understanding your personal history in a healthy, motivating way. This is where Jungian archetypes come in. The philosopher Robert M. Ellis defines the archetype as any symbol that helps maintain meaningful inspiration over time. In the creation of a personal mythology, you want to identify symbolism that energizes you, that mobilizes you toward your growth as a person as you learn to better adapt to the environmental conditions that you find yourself in. To get a better grip on why archetypes are important, I want to introduce you to the 4 archetypal functions that Ellis talks about. The first one is the heroic function. Basically just means to live and develop as human beings in the long term, we need the ability to make plans and see them through to fulfill goals. Okay, that's the heroic function. Archetypes that fulfill that function are heroic archetypes. The shadow function is that we need to be able to identify and avoid or eliminate long-term threats. Again, any archetype that fulfills that function is fulfilling the shadow function. The animus function, we need to be able to develop relationships with those who are different from us, but who may have complementary qualities. Think of this as an antidote to narrow specialization, where we're looking for qualities that we don't have. Often this is sexual or romantic, but it doesn't have to be. Now, the final one is the potentiality or God function, okay? To remind you, I am an atheist, I do not believe in God, and so that's why I've named this the potentiality function. This is probably the hardest to wrap your mind around, but the general idea is that we need to be able to maintain a vision of the possibilities for our own individual long-term development and that of our communities, while keeping ideals in mind for how things could be as well as how they actually are. When this function works well, it is about opening ourselves to real potentials that exist beyond us, okay? Hopefully it'll make more sense in a moment, but that's generally speaking what it is. We will go deeper into this in the future. Again though, this is symbolism that is meant to mobilize our energies to perform these functions in our lives over the long term. Okay, the very key point. When you watch an inspiring movie, you've had your heroic function energized. When you watch a romantic movie, you have had your anima function energized. When you watch a documentary that opens your eyes to some aspect of reality that you knew nothing about, widening the potentiality of your feeling, thinking, and acting, beyond prior limits, that would be your potentiality function. Regardless of which function has been energized by the whole package of symbolism in those movies, the point is that they inspire us to move in meaningful directions over the long term. And that's actually the issue, okay? That's the very, very big issue. I say movies because they are a good example for understanding how archetypes can have the energizing power that they do. But they are a bad example as far as motivating us towards something legitimately meaningful long term. Sure, you can watch a beautiful love story that motivates you to connect more deeply with your girlfriend, or that motivates you to go out to actually get a girlfriend. However, it's highly unlikely that these movies inspire action toward these things for very long. Often enough, we lose motivation and then go back to living our meaningless lives as usual. So I know that last sentence sounds harsh, but a meaningless life is harsh. And in the digital age, we are constantly being bombarded by symbolism that mobilizes us in random directions. Often these directions are only defined by whoever can afford to get the right symbolism in front of us. What this leads to is what is called projection, which, put simply, this just means that your own inner power becomes hooked onto and then corrupted by these symbols. We are sent in random directions and prevented from redirecting ourselves in another direction that we might actually care about. The key takeaway here is that you are already being given archetypal mythologies by big corporations who are only motivated by the desire to make as much money from you as they can. These are the mythologies that you are already living by. You're already living them. Let's take a look at a specific example. In recent years, muscle dysmorphia has increasingly become a problem for young men. Growing up, I had severe body image issues, and they eventually manifested as muscle dysmorphia. While I never purged food, I would binge on unhealthy foods and then go on a 2-hour bike ride to burn those calories off. And this was after having already taken my bike to work, stood all day at work, gone weightlifting after work only to ride my bike home after that. I then would deprive myself of sleep just so I had the time to do all of this. To motivate myself, I'd go on the subreddit r/bodybuilding and look at images of guys who were clearly taking steroids. They were muscular, shredded, seemingly confident, and just badass. In other words, they were everything that I wasn't, and so I was deeply motivated to become just like them. Surprise, surprise, when this led at the age of 23 to my own use of steroids. I only used them for a single cycle of 16 weeks, but saw a huge increase in muscle and strength and, unfortunately, fat. By the end of the cycle, I was struck by how little I now liked the way I looked. One of the things I actually always heard on the subreddit is that there's no such thing as a single cycle. And seeing how I looked after only one, I now knew very clearly why. Now, fortunately, that was the only time I've ever done steroids in my life, and my relationship to my body is far, far healthier. I'll probably go into that in the future video on male body dysmorphia. However, the major point that I want to make with that story is for you to notice how I projected my own power onto the images of these Olympian physiques. They served to mobilize and then ossify several of the archetypal functions. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, is the fact that seeing these images mobilized a heroic projection. I had a series of goals, and looking at these images motivated me to stay true to my exercise routine, and then when I binged on food, they motivated me to take no prisoners and conquer myself by working the failure out of my system through compulsive exercise. They also indirectly mobilized an anima projection because they represented the body I needed to attain in order to deserve positive attention from women. Shamefully fat as I was, I didn't deserve any positive regard. But by imagining myself muscular, I could also feel myself motivated by how many women I would be able to get. Finally, these images mobilized me against threat. Through these images, I was taught to hate my body, my impulses, and my current self. You can see here how motivationally complex even a single symbol can be. They serve far more than one function and are related to a wide array of beliefs and emotions. However, they also shaped and formed my beliefs and emotions. They taught me certain beliefs and reinforced beliefs I already had in regards to my goals, about what it takes to attain women, that women were something to attain, that my body was inadequate and I should hate it unless it was perfect, and so on. All of my inner powers were hooked and then caged by the way in which these images affected me. Many of the men who were posting themselves only wanted positive attention for their own achievements, or to motivate other people. If any of them knew that somewhere out there a young man was destroying himself with these images, many of them would have felt awful about it. And so I don't mean to blame them for that at all. And so this is all related to one of the most important points I hope you take away from this video. You are already living a myth that is defined by archetypes existing out there in the world. These archetypes are mobilizing you toward goals that they themselves influence you to value and give you specific beliefs and strategies in order to achieve those goals. My heroic projection was in how I could only be a hero by achieving this Olympian physique. Of all the ways I could have achieved something meaningful, my options were hyper-narrowed and fixated on this one option, and so it was just inevitable that I would do anything necessary to achieve that goal. Again, just so I could have some sort of positive self-regard. Of course, these symbols do come against the beliefs you already have, so it's not like they influence you in a vacuum. I already believed that I wasn't enough, and so when I looked at those images, they reinforced that belief. And then that belief was warped into thinking that the only way to like myself was by attaining that body through the use of steroids. Someone else with body image issues might come along and be repulsed by these images, and instead wish to be as skinny as possible. Another person with good mental health may view the same exact pictures and be inspired to work out in healthy ways. Even though archetypes work with your prior beliefs, the point is that they do have an effect, and so they can take advantage of the dissonance within your own belief system. Because if you would have asked me at the time whether women only liked muscular guys, I would have told you that this isn't true because many women like chubby guys. However, I had also been bullied for being fat while I was growing up, and so I learned that being overweight meant pain and social ostracism. Muscularity was the only way I would be able to prevent that pain and social ostracism, because I would be celebrated for being muscular just like those guys on our bodybuilding were. And I would be accepted and loved by those women who did like muscular guys. Again, you can see how my entire conception of what I should do is just narrowed and fixated on what I've projected all of my inner capacities onto. I could only be a hero by conforming to this one narrow idea of what a man should look like. That's the issue. And so let's try to connect the dots that I've outlined so far. I had a certain life narrative about my weight that informed the reasons for why I wanted to become muscular. At the time, I self-identified as a nihilist, but I clearly lived as if my overweight was the reason for why I wanted to become muscular. I was then confronted by the archetype of the Olympian physique, and this mobilized my energies toward the creation of my own Olympian physique. However much of a nihilistic atheist I was clearly still living a mythology, and it was quite literally threatening my life. As such, if you're already living a mythology that influences and is influenced by the archetypes that exist out in the world, then it just simply stands to reason, rationality, and logic that you should actively, consciously start creating and living by your own personal mythology. This would be a mythology that is defined by your actual life narrative, but interpreted in a way that gives reason for who you want to be as a man and the life that you would like to live. Additionally, rather than being pulled by archetypes that you compulsively view because you hate your body, or however that would manifest for you specifically, you are instead motivated to seek out archetypes that mobilize your energies toward growth that would be healthy for you, that would be in alignment with your values, that would be able to expand your definitions of heroism, of the anima function, etc. You're not narrowed, but expanded instead. And so with all that being said, I know that this may seem very abstract. Given the length of this video already, I don't want to go into too much depth. I'll be applying this to specific archetypes such as the succubus in the future, where you'll get a deeper understanding of this. However, what I'd like to end on is how exactly archetypes can be used to promote growth. This is called the process of integration. So let's return to the example of the Olympian physique that motivates young men to have muscle dysmorphia and unhealthy lifestyles. Let's say you're one of these young men. What you want to do is to start feeling into a wider context that allows for greater possibilities. One strategy would be to start a meditation practice to cultivate awareness. Your increased awareness allows you to begin connecting your underlying beliefs and emotions related to the archetype with the archetype itself. Even though I didn't understand archetypes at the time, once I realized how our bodybuilding was affecting me, I immediately stopped using it. Awareness of the problem itself was the only curative I needed to stop my daily worship of the Olympian physique. Unsurprisingly, within a matter of days, the desire to use steroids began to vanish. For yourself, whether you experience muscle dysmorphia or something else, meditation can help you notice how the various things you engage with mobilize your energies toward emotions, beliefs, and lifestyles that you no longer wish to have. Now, if you'd like an effective strategy to cultivate the habit of meditation, then please check out the free assignment link in the top comment below. Either way, meditation also helps to soothe us by relaxing the body enough to allow alternatives to emerge in our awareness. In other words, rather than being knocked this way and that by your desperate need for the perfect body as a salve for your inadequacy, you're able to find some sort of calm center amidst that still raging emotional storm. It doesn't necessarily mean everything gets better, but you can still find that grounding, that calm center. Ellis further describes meditation as a way to illuminate our mind so that we can actually see what's going on in our mind. You're now not so tightly bound to that one way of feeling or thinking about things, and thus new connections can actually be made. For example, you can create more reasons for self-compassion rather than mere self-hatred or self-denial. This would allow you to respond to your failures in ways that make sustainable success more likely. The reason I kept binging on food despite my desperate desire not to was precisely because I punished my worthless self with compulsive exercise, rather than forgiving myself and loving myself. Again, if you're also someone who struggles with muscle dysmorphia, you can also begin to see how weightlifting can be an avenue for health and accomplishment rather than merely attaining some perfect ideal as a condition to finally start loving yourself. You can become aware of how the compulsive exercise is hurting your body and instead make room for something that relaxes your body, whether that's some easy yoga or a hot bath with a good book, whatever it is. You can see how these moments of rest and recovery are as important for improving your body as a heavy workout in the gym. In other words, through the process of mindfulness, you can begin to integrate or bring together the various elements of yourself that have been rejected based on old beliefs and unresolved emotions. But becoming aware of the archetypes that are already mobilizing your energies, you can begin to challenge and change them, or perhaps drop them altogether for a better alternative. In either case, you are able to expand your understanding of yourself, your goals, and the world. And so now obviously, the process of integration is far more complex than this, but you can already see how powerful something as simple as meditation can be for that process. Again, if you'd like an effective strategy for cultivating that habit, then please check out the free assignment link in the top comment below. Like I said though, in the future, I'll be going far deeper into specific archetypes, as well as how you can identify your own and learn to connect with others that are more empowering given your values, your goals, that kind of thing. This was merely just meant to be an introductory piece to demonstrate the importance of personal mythology and the power of archetypes in that mythology. As I said throughout this, you are already living a myth, likely one that has been given to you without your conscious awareness or consent. If you want to live a myth that actually supports you, you need to bring consciousness to the myth you're already living, and then transform it into a myth you'd prefer to live. And so on my channel, I will be giving you all the theory and exercises you need to make your own personal mythology. But I will also exemplify the theory by offering my own personal mythology. If you connect with the symbols and narratives, then by all means use them, change them, adapt them to your own mythology. But also be open to finding other archetypes that suit you better. At the end of the day though, personal mythology is not just an intellectual exercise. Bond says this well. Mythological consciousness comes from the need to live in a context. Fantasy coalesces into a ritual that moves our bodies. Play evolves into work that moves our hands. The game becomes a style that guides our lives. Either way, that is enough for today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos and conversations that go very deeply into masculinity, psychological development, and the cultivation of a meaningful personal mythology. Thanks again, and all the best to you on whatever journey you find yourself on.